share a friend, John Tyson, in common, and for those, Tyson Foods, and he talks about, it reminds me of what you said to your father, he talks about that even some of those really tough, brutal jobs, sort of in the killing and cutting up the animal pieces and preparing the food, that for many people, they can't wait to get to work because that may be the safest place of their life. That some of their homes might be broken or might be abuse issues and whatnot, and that workplace is, for many people, even if it's a tough workplace, is the safest place.
That's actually been my complete experience in the restaurant industry. At Popeyes, we had 60,000 frontline people working every day, about 35 per restaurant. And we were their safe haven in most cases. And we were also the place of learning and encouragement. We were the place of correction. Maybe perhaps parenting wasn't there. We've put a lot of kids through high school and helped them get better grades. I think, the stewardship responsibility, I often talk to our restaurant managers about it because they were often the social worker, the counselor, the financial advisor, the teacher of these young people in their very first job. And so, if you ever wonder if your first job mattered, I think it might have been the most important job, and it still remains today a place where the world needs our influence.
Yeah. What was your very first job? First paid job?
Well, it's funny. My first paid job was I taught knitting lessons.
Taught knitting lessons?
Yeah, actually not far from here. Danbury, Connecticut is where I went to middle school and high school. We lived 3 years in 11 places, so that was a short stop, but that's where my first job was, and I was paid in yarn. I kept a little note card on how many people I taught to knit, and then I collected on that by getting yarn to make more sweaters. So, yeah, weird, that's true.
And did you learn any lessons from that perhaps subconsciously, that you look back today and go, wow, that I took a story from that?
I just had, I think work ethic, really. Why, 12 years old, would I get up on Saturday mornings and teach people how to make mittens all day? I don't know, but I was industrious, and that woman who ran that shop gave me an opportunity to help her and learn how to apply those skills in a positive way. Plus, you might have noticed I'm 6 feet tall. I had to make my own clothes. Like they didn't make clothes in my size, so never owned a pair of jeans till I was 30 years old. So it was also practical learning too of how you take care of yourself.
Yeah, it is amazing how that their first job is maybe their first role modeling of what a healthy life can look like in the fullest sense of the word health. Because isn't it like 1 in 10 people in the country at some point be working in the food industry?
Actually, 2/3 of Americans work in a restaurant at some time during their life.
Wow.
And I often call it the industry of second chances because many of them come to us at a downturn in their life. It's not, a lot of it is early, high school, first job kind of thing. But a tremendous amount of it is second job need or time of crisis, need to get back in the workforce. We bring a lot of rehabbed people into the restaurant business, a lot of people living the prison system. The first place that will give them a chance is a restaurant.
Really? So, I think you've lived this question that we probe, and obviously how you call it servant leadership, and there's lots of ways to talk about it. But how can we be successful as leaders, effective as leaders, and yet have this North Star, which for many people, I know in your case, is your faith. But before we get into some of that, you've had this amazing career, but tell me about being a kid, growing up where you grew up, your siblings, you're the oldest of 4, if I recall.
That's right. No, I am, and growing up was a long time ago, but it was a very important part of my foundation. When people ask me who the most important mentor in my life was, I always say my dad. My dad and my mother, but from a business perspective, my dad was the business executive. And a huge formative part of my childhood was sitting around the dinner table with my parents and hearing stories about the workplace and how he was impacting the workplace. And I tell mothers and fathers all the time, do not underestimate what your children are listening to. Because at that dinner table, the 4 of us really learned all the values that we take with us into leadership today. And I have some pretty cool siblings. All 3 of them are also CEOs.
Yeah, and that's the hit ratio, 4 out of 4 have been presidents or CEOs of companies.
That's my parents. I don't say that for bragging rights. It's a tribute to my parents. And the fact that I believe how you do business is actually more important than what you do in
how
business.
versus what? Interesting.
And I think that's what they emphasized. They said, if you're in these circumstances, here's how you make these kinds of choices. And my dad he was a big 6'5" hulk of a guy, kind of brusque, used some language. But he had a heart of gold for the people that were entrusted to his care. So I learned some
That's
really
interesting
good
phrase,
things.
people who were entrusted to his care.
How he thought about it.
Huh. Because you didn't say employees.
No.
Very interesting.
No, he ran factories, and so he had frontline factory workers, and he cared deeply about their families and the communities. He would lose sleep if he had to close a factory, and he would pour over making it a place that they would enjoy coming to work. He set lots of good examples for us.
Wow.
On a personal level, one of the things that I've gotten to witness is I've raised an adopted daughter that came out of an orphanage in Russia. We adopted her at 11. And so I've raised a child that had no parents. And so while I was extremely blessed in my family, I would tell you some of the most important lessons I've learned about how to steward this generation is raising Katya. She's 25 today and had an extremely troubled, abusive childhood before we met her, and no proper parenting, not even nutrition. I mean, she didn't have anything. An insight that I got, I was in the principal's office in 7th grade. Katya and I spent a lot of time in the principal's office. And I was kind of embarrassed because my other two children were more well-behaved. And so I'm saying, embarrassed. And the principal said, Cheryl, calm down. Over 50% of the people in this school are struggling with the issues that Katya's struggling with. And it was a really wake-up call for me to think about in business what the implications are, because we're receiving those children into the workplace from broken homes, from abuse, from really tragic settings. And as you said, we may be the first opportunity they have to be reached and cared for in a proper way.
Yeah. But, so I want to come back to this. How do you teach values? I mean, I think society struggles with, in a corporate sense without being heavy-handed. How did you enculturate, if you will, the folks that would come in who maybe didn't come with the grounding that you had?
Yeah, the values thing, I was just teaching on this in a class yesterday. Everyone says they have values, and if I ask any one of you, do you have a value? Duh, yeah. Integrity, truth, honesty. You start rattling off words you've heard before. But very few people, you may remember like 30 years ago, there was this values prioritization thing that everyone was into. But that's actually, we don't do that. That's what we don't do. We don't really define the values that we want to live out in our lives and make them really concrete action things that we do in the workplace. So an example of the conversations we had with employees is we had a values clarifications exercise. It was part of our Journey to Personal Purpose class at Popeyes. And we asked people, there's a deck of cards, John Maxwell sells them online for $10 or something. And it asks you to go through this stack of values and decide which ones you want to be your top 3. And people get to 10 really fast to kind of sort, the ones like, I always ditch fitness. I have no interest in fitness, but, I always love learning. So they get through that first layer pretty fast, but they really struggle with 3. And the finest point on it for the workplace is I always said, for many people, a version of family or faith was in their top values. I would make them set them over here. And not to discourage them from those values in any way, but to make them go even deeper still on how they would express their family and faith value at work. So, for example, if you make them set those aside, then they have to think about, well, if I want to stand for integrity, what would I do differently at work? If I want to stand for learning, what would I do differently at work? It just made them kind of dig in. And then we had them share with their work group those values, and we put them in their performance reviews, so that their personal purpose and their value statements were always visible when we were talking about performance results. So if we merge those two thoughts, that we have a society of people that need more help becoming the best version of themselves, the workplace is going to have to do some of this work that maybe parenting once did, or maybe it didn't. right? So the workplace has to figure that out. And that's what our Journey to Personal Purpose class was. It was to give you the opportunity to explore three things: your life experiences, your God-given strengths, what's positive, what gifts do you have, what talents, and then your values. And then we would help them write a sentence or two around purpose that would help them feel their workplace was a more compelling place to show up in the morning. And not everyone was keen for this exercise. I'm not going to lie. There were some that never did it ever. But
was it something that everyone had to go through as part of the onboarding?
Yeah, it was part of our leadership class.
Okay.
Yeah. So everyone did it. My favorite positive impact from it is a gentleman came out of the 2-day class. The first day included this Journey to Personal Purpose, and then it also taught skills, coaching, delegating, some other leadership skills. But he came out and he said, you know what, if you hadn't made me start with myself, I don't think I would have heard anything else you said about leadership. So I want to encourage you that we don't usually get this personal at work and kind of digging into understand our people and help them understand themselves. But getting personal is part of getting them really committed at work and really engaged is the traditional word, right?
What were your 3 values, if I'm asked?
Responsibility, learning, and legacy.
Responsibility, learning, and legacy.
Yeah, I'm wired for responsibility. It's kind of a sickness, really.
I have a hunch there's a few people in the room like that.
Gosh, yeah. Sometimes I really have to fight with it because I just never want to let anybody down. It's a crazy thing. But on the good side of it is I always show up. I'm on time even if I don't like morning. You can count on it. Learning. I'm a book junkie, particularly leadership book junkie, always have been. Got that from my dad. My dad was an intense reader.
Didn't you play word games at your dinner table?
Always word games, and that's only gotten more intense because my husband's like masterful word game man. Yeah. And then legacy, I think as we get older, wiser still, I think we start thinking about that more.
Yeah.
This week I've been thinking a lot about what my role is in my grandchildren's lives. I now have 3 little munchkins, little boys, 3 daughters, and the oldest one's given me 3 little boys, which is very fun, trains, trucks, and wrestling. But trying to figure out, what role I might play in their lives, because that's something my parents role modeled. They had 13 grandchildren, and they made a personal commitment to come alongside each one of them.
That's terrific. That's terrific. As we look at, when I look at your resume as part of your legacy, so we can reduce it to paper, that you've done this, and this, and some of your career you had some dead ends. You got fired once. Tell us about what did you learn from some of the painful parts? Because I'm sure if we're all honest in this room, we've had some dead ends too, where either of our own volition or someone saying, you don't fit anymore, or you're not delivering whatever, and those are painful moments. If you don't mind, could you share some of that and what you took away from it, how that might have changed you?
Yeah, I often say I haven't learned much from success. And if you think about that in your life, right, we've all had some version of success that you just don't take much other than a woo-hoo, right? That's cool. But a colossal trial or failure, smack you in the head, you take some lessons home, right? Yeah, it sticks with you for years. And so I had kind of a collision of 3 moons and about 15, 16 years ago that were one of these kind of dead-end streets. The first was a health crisis. I got diagnosed with breast cancer, and I'm not going to tell you a sob story about it, but I'll tell you type A personalities don't like that diagnosis very much. We look at the doctors and go, are you out of your mind? That's not on my life plan. Excuse me. So that was the first crisis. And then 2 years from that date, I got fired from my job. I was president of KFC restaurants. And that was going to be my pinnacle career job. That was my plan, right? It was the largest restaurant company in the world. It was really polished. Everybody came from Pepsi, which was the polished people from your part of the world up here. And I was going to get to be one of those, right? And so I was their first woman executive. There's just all kinds of hoo-ha about it. But it turns out that was my colossal, failure, public failure. If I brought the newspaper from that day, right? They don't print pretty pictures of you when you get fired, just in case you're wondering. Cover of the business section had a desperately bad picture, president replaced at KFC, and my kids had to answer questions about it at school. So it was. I always tell people, cancer kind of leveled me in an end-of-self way, right? Because that's kind of going, oh, well, I don't get to pick the day that my last day, right? And I don't know why I thought I could, but we live in delusional worlds. So that kind of leveled me from a mortality standpoint. But the humiliation of public failure was much more difficult. Much more difficult. And I would tell you that was far more the, bring me flat face to the ground from a faith perspective and say, well, God, I thought you and I had a plan, but clearly not.
You're not keeping up your side.
You're not keeping up your side. Yeah, this was a colossal disappointment and caused a lot of questioning.
I can imagine. And as you probably know, and for those who do poke around in the Bible from time to time, a lot of what Paul talks about in the New Testament is it's counterintuitive, but that he actually says, bring on the pain and suffering. Yeah. And through that is when God and Christ does his work in and through us.
I love that paragraph where he just tells you some of the few things that have happened to him in his life, and it's pretty bad stuff.
Shipwrecked, stoned, beaten, imprisoned, and all of this.
And he considers it all joy. Yeah. I don't know about you, but I struggle with that joy thing.
But that is part of this faith message of the Christian tradition, isn't it?
I call it living life with open palms, because these events force us, we're not very good at this as humans, but it forces us to unlock our clinch on life, our hold on it, and become more trusting and more in sync with God. In the Bible, there's the fruits of the Spirit paragraph. I'm not as good at you at chapter and verse, but the fruits of the Spirit, and I always aspired to, I thought those were so cool. How do you get those? Well, the line we never read is the verse after it says, the way you experience the fruits of the Spirit, patience, joy, all those wonderful things, is to walk at the pace of the Spirit. Type A personality, I walk a little too fast. Yeah, so checking ourselves, are we really in relationship with Christ? And are we really interested in his plan and his pace? Slow down. Pause on that thought, because that's where I find the insight, is when I slow down and listen for his word and his counsel, not my own.
You talk about, for those who remember this verse, the fruits of the Spirit, of patience, joy, love, these different attributes, wonderful attributes. And the idea is that your faith should manifest itself a bit like you're saying, what do values look like at work, and how do you what do they look like? And so this is what a Christian life ought to look like. Quick side story, I once was interviewing a gentleman, similar conversation, and he had inherited a dysfunctional senior leadership team. He was promoted to be CEO of this company, dysfunctional leadership team. It happened that there were 9 direct reports. He was a very committed Christian. His management team was not in any shape or form. He asked them, without telling them, he cut a piece of paper and put the 9 different fruits on a random piece of paper, put them in a bowl, and asked the team, everyone to pull out one word, one piece of paper, and he didn't tell them what the source was. He said, I want each of you just to take the next 30 days and intentionally think about this word and try to have it enhance that as part of your leadership style. Extraordinary thing. And here's what happened. The word that everyone picked happened to be just what they needed to be working on. Wow. It's kind of like I get goosebumps thinking the story. Yeah. And you couldn't have planned that. And then on top of it, the team transformed because each of them focused on a particular fruit, a particular attribute, and the whole team transformed after 30 days.
So I want to punctuate a really important part of that story, which is how do we express our faith in the marketplace in a way that is people can be receptive to it. So I was struggling with that because I never wanted to be preachy or judgmental or harsh about expressing my faith, because I don't think I'm all that great. I think I'm just struggling like everybody else to live a faithful life. But how do you express that? And so the missionary that I adore the most is a man dedicated his life in Nigeria to preaching the gospel, and his life is under threat every day. Okay?
Literally under threat.
Literally under threat. I mean, and he probably one day will get a message that Daniel's been killed. And so he's so brave. And so I asked him, I said, how do you be so brave? Give me some insight. I'm in a public company, right? He's like, okay, what's a public company? So I explained that. I said, I want to be brave like you in my world. What would that look like? And he just looked back and he said, speak in Scripture and never say chapter and verse, which is what you just said. Speak in Scripture and never say chapter and verse. I now challenge myself to put a Bible verse in every blog post I write on leadership, but I don't quote it. I've done similar exercises in the marketplace around biblical principles and put them out there on the table. What do you think about this principle? They're so transcendent. They lead to fascinating conversations. And what I like to make people curious about the source of my faith, not about me. And so can we live our lives in a way, can we put these ideas and principles out there in a way that they're attractive to people and they make people curious as to the source? That would be my witness in the workplace.
And was when you had the KFC experience and you're kind of brought to your knees, as you say, well, did you find at that point that your faith strengthened you, or were you kind of mad at God and you went and you said, the deal is not working out how I thought?
Well, I did the trendy thing Christians are doing these days. The halftime book had been written around that time with Bob Buford. And, evidently, everyone who has a career crisis in midlife is supposed to go into ministry. So I had that awakening, but my discovery, it took me a while to figure this out. I'm not designed for that. That would be a really bad idea, and luckily some faithful friends told me that. But yeah, we go kind of, when your road dead ends, we say, well, of course I've missed God's message, and I need to go to Africa and build water wells, or something needs to happen dramatic. And I haven't found God quite so dramatic. What he really drew me attention to is that he wanted me to have a bigger impact on how we train up the next generation of leaders. And it was really less of me, more of him, was the lesson in getting fired. And now it's easy in retrospect to see, right? But the lesson that I now see is he said, I'm going to take this thing away that was a little too important to you, flatten you about that part, and then show you how you can be a voice for servant leadership in the public marketplace. But 4 years, I went I call it my Israeli, wilderness years. Right. 4 years between KFC and Popeyes, where I had no understanding that I would ever come back into the CEO role. I thought I failed. I thought I was toast. I was going to serve on boards, and do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he had a very different view that if I get you where I need you,
right,
then you can work for me.
Then you can go flourish.
And then you can have a 10-year run teaching these principles that are biblical principles in the public sector. And my premise, and I truly believe this, if we conduct business in a godly way, God will figure out how to bless it. Right? It might not be stock price. I mean, I get a lot of kudos for that, but that's really not the blessing. The blessing, it turns out, is that I've been able to touch hundreds of leaders and help them consider the source of their leadership principles and how they execute them in the marketplace. So that's been the blessing.
Some of you remember Ken Blanchard, the one-minute manager and so forth. And at one point in his life, he became a Christian, became a central part of his thinking and actually a lot of his consulting work. And he referred to the problem of ego. And I go, yeah, okay, right. And he defined his ego means edging God out.
I love that.
God out. And I think when we're all driven to succeed in our work, which we should, obviously we are meant to do excellent things and move the needle, that sometimes we're edging God out. And
we do it a lot. When you teach servant leadership, you have to be really careful because it's like standing up in front of crowds and saying, I'm humble. That doesn't go real well. And so I always say with servant leadership, I only get up every day and aspire to be a servant leadership because I fall short so much. And part of servant leadership is how you hold yourself accountable. Yeah. I have a friend who's not a Christian, but he has one of the best accountability practices I've ever heard. So I'm now telling all my Christian friends. He's a swimmer, and he swims like 100 laps or something crazy every morning. And he uses the swim laps to hold himself accountable to basically the virtues of kindness and how he conducts his business with people and checks himself on every transaction of the prior day. Boy, I don't do that. And I'm so inspired by that right now to think about it. I was talking about the mirror check, right? Do we look in the mirror? Do we hold ourselves accountable to these things? And really live up to these things we say we believe. And I think that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. Have you ever had an employee or a trusted lieutenant or someone in your professional life sort of call you out on a behavior?
Yeah, and it's important to be.
Well, I'm asking really unpleasant questions, aren't I?
Yes, you like to do that.
Would you mind sharing it? Just curious, because that takes guts.
Because you try to forget those really quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think like remember one. Listening is one I think as leaders we should get called out on a lot, and I love strategy and vision, so I'm always thinking big ideas. And as soon as I think of them, I think they're great, right? And so I talk too much and I tell too much, and I think that I'm building excitement, but a lot of time I'm trouncing the response to the idea. So yeah, I've been called out on, could you just stop talking and let us respond to that idea and that notion?
But that's huge that someone felt the messenger wouldn't be shot, that they felt safe enough to call you out.
Well, you won't get any feedback if you don't create a safe environment. Yeah. So if you're not getting feedback right now, I'd ask that question. Why would people not tell you the truth?
Yeah.
It's the single biggest risk in leadership is that no one will tell you the truth.
Yeah, you're surrounded by psychopaths. Did you ever notice, by the way, that you're funnier the more senior you get? Everyone laughs at your jokes?
They all laugh at your jokes. They all show up at your meetings. It's just amazing. Yeah.
And yet it's a false reality, isn't it?
It's very false.
How do you, and you don't have to be the CEO, I mean, you could be running a department or running a division. How do you tell when someone's frankly just kissing up to you versus genuinely giving you honest input?
Well, that's what they're generally doing. There's very little honest feedback, and the only strategy I've found around it is to just ask frequently for feedback. And as a CEO, I did a 360 every other year and presented the findings unfiltered to my board.
You did? Wow.
Because it wasn't to look good with them, but it was to make sure I kept holding a mirror up, unfiltered, and was open to feedback, and I let them tell me things that were hard to hear. And when your board or your boss tells you have a development need, most of us go, I don't really want to have one of those. So just kind of you got to make yourself do that. Yeah. You got to make yourself get feedback from people. So asking for feedback regularly, giving forums for that, and then listening kind of to the hallway conversation, because the higher you go, you kind of have to get it through other sources as to what people think. If people if people say you're driven, ask more questions. What do you mean by that? How's that a good thing? How's that a bad thing? Yeah. Right? Because often
driving over someone,
you're running right over people, right? And so if people compliment you, I would encourage you to ask more questions.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed when people, for those of you who make it to worship, whatever your congregation might be, that I've never heard someone say, "Thanks, preacher, that was a lousy sermon." They always say it's great.
No, they don't say that.
Yeah. One of the big social issues right now, and frankly, it's been around forever, it just has more attention now, is the Me Too movement. And it's important to men and women in our workplaces. It's a big topic, and how do you think about it in your board life, and as you look back to your role as a senior executive, even before the movement as such became front of mind?
I guess
do you think about this?
The first thing my friends and I did, because we're old, is like, did you guys all just notice this? I mean, for 40 years we've had these things.
This ain't no news flash.
This is not new. It has a hashtag now, but it's not new at all. And the principle for me in talking about this is human dignity. The biblical principle is creation. Men and women were both created in the image of God. It does not say one or the other. It just says both of us. And so to me that demands a dignity towards one another. I want to be clear that I don't think all men are bad, and I would hate it if you left the room thinking that. I do not. I have had a fabulous career of working side by side with a lot of high integrity men. So that's not my point. My point is, if we have this problem, which we apparently do, the solution is how we think about one another and what's appropriate behavior towards one another and what respect looks like. And I think women and men both need to think about it. My personal experience is most of these problems happen after alcohol and 9 p.m. One of my first general counsel said to me, be Cinderella and get the hell out by 9 p.m. And she gave me one of the best advices, because I did stay past and had some regrets about after 9 p.m. because that's usually where this stuff happens. So being careful about where you are, being careful about the reminder that you're also a role model. You forget as a leader that people are watching you too and how you behave in business settings. But it really just comes down, do we really believe that each other are deserving of dignity? And that we would treat each other differently if we did. I had a great conversation with my CFO. He knows that I tell the story. I walked by his office space one day, and he was hauling off on his executive assistant. I mean, hauling. And sure enough, she started tearing up. And sure enough, she kind of packed up and went home about 4 o'clock that day. So I didn't say anything till the next morning. And I said, so, Will, what was that about? And he said, what? And I said, hauling off.
Is hauling off Midwestern for like laying into someone?
Yeah, well, I don't know what you call it in England.
I missed that one here.
He had a stress moment, and he took it out on her big time.
Got it. He was using
yelling,
some nasty words, etc.
Not nice language.
Got it. Okay.
And condescending, not pleasant. And everyone's watching. We're cubicles, right? We all live in cubicles, so the whole world's watching. So I challenged him on it the next morning, and I said, "What about that demonstrated your personal belief in human dignity?" Wow. And there was a really long pause.
Wow.
And he teared up.
Wow.
And he said nothing about that was consistent with my belief in human dignity.
Wow.
And so, these are, I encourage you to have these conversations at work. They are personal, they are deep, but this is where we have some breakthroughs in what our leadership roles and responsibilities are.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. Did he, out of curiosity, talk to the woman?
Oh, absolutely. Apologized. It was hard to recover from. He learned that too, right? Yeah. Trust busting is very hard to recover from. But, public apology, but apology to everyone who saw the situation. Really fessed up. That's why I talk about it. He's such a good man. And his principle is there. But we just have to make sure we live it.
It's a great way to frame the discussion, because it's a challenging topic to go into, but framing it as dignity is a fresh lens. It's fresh vocabulary, because how can one not be in favor of dignity and equal dignity, whether one looks at it through a biblical lens or just a societal lens?
Well, and it's awfully close to the respect word that's thrown around a lot in culture. So I find it's just a little bit more pressing word to get people to go one step deeper in that whole conversation about what it looks like.
Yeah, that's terrific. Wow. I want to open it up to questions in a minute. Before I do it, let me ask you one last question while people are thinking of theirs. Sometimes, particularly knowledge workers, all of us in this room are probably all overeducated and have more opportunities than we know what to do with, even though we may not feel like it, compared to the rest of the country, the rest of the world. Now and then people will, with a certain arrogance, say, well, I don't want to be a hamburger flipper. It's this derogatory thing. You've been talking about people who flip hamburgers and do the other things these 35 people do in each of your Popeye stores. And you're talking about a chance for some human dignity. You're talking about a chance for people to get onto the economic ladder. You're talking about people to have opportunities. What do you recoil when you hear someone talk about hamburger flippers?
Yeah, it makes me sick because it lacks dignity. Yeah. And it demeans, for a large group of people, their best opportunity and path to economic well-being. I invested most of my career in the franchising business because it is a retail business, it is a starting wage job, and it also has a beautiful ladder, even to business ownership, which most people forget about. But one of our large Popeyes franchisees who owned 35 restaurants, he started as a fry cook in a chicken store. And he's a multimillionaire today, and that work afforded him that economic opportunity. Now, not everybody does that, but there are a lot of American dream stories. 40% of Popeyes franchisees were immigrants to this country. They started with nothing. Lal Sultanzana in New York City slept in the alley in Harlem next to the restaurant while he learned how to fry chicken. And today he lives on Long Island in a beautiful home and has college-educated children. So, it is a path. And so those are the big stories. The little stories. For a single mom to become a restaurant supervisor of 5 restaurants, she's running a $7-10 million business. And she's making good money, and she's got a new car, and her kids are good. So I just want to remind us that when we talk down towards these retail or frontline opportunities, or factories, or any of the frontline work,
service works,
we really diminish a huge part of the stepping stones available to people in our country. And frankly, for immigrants, it's the reason they come here. The reason they come is we offer one of the few countries that gives you that opportunity. So I'm pretty passionate about that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Wow.
Well, it's never intended to be a job for life. It's intended to be a stepping stone job. And so the responsibility, our stewardship responsibility, is to help them step up the opportunity ladder, not to be satisfied with the first day on the job, right? And we do things, what people don't know is we do things very promptly at a starting wage. After 90 days, almost everybody gets a raise. And after another 6 months, almost everybody gets a raise. And as my operations leader said, he's never turned down someone's interest in becoming a shift runner or a general manager. We don't have enough of them. So the idea that we're oppressing people and holding them back is inaccurate. If they want to proceed, there are many, many opportunities. And it's really basic stuff in these starting phases, right? If you show up for work, wear a clean uniform and a name tag, you're hired. Okay? We don't have billions of criteria, and we do hire felons and drug addicts. We hire anybody that needs a start. And so at the end of the day, I believe in the competitive wage. And the wage, if we had not fettered it with regulation, would already be where we want it to be. We just fettered it with regulation. And so, I'm going to be honest, I'm a free market person. It works, right? And so in markets where the competitive wage is $15, every Popeyes store pays $15, or they would have no people. It works. And we want it to work. I want that for those employees. So let's let the markets work and the people prosper.
Thanks.
I think we all are who we are because we're who God created us to be. And I wish more people were on a path to discover how special and unique they have been designed. I wish society reinforced that. And I think one of the concrete ways in the workplace we can do that is instead of having a performance review telling people for 55 minutes what's wrong with them, why don't we tell them what's right with them and why we value them. And it's been a privilege. I've obviously been a female senior leader way before that was cool. And I'm happy to be part of that cohort. I hope it's opened up opportunity for other women. I hope it's helped men make more sense out of women, because I think one of the things I want to be is a woman in business. And I used to say before I had a better idea, I said, when people ask me my purpose at work, I said, I think like a man, I act like a lady, and I work like a dog. So, then I tried to get more grown up about it and say something better. But I really
stick with the first one. That worked.
It always gets a laugh. But I really wanted to be a good role model. I have 3 daughters, right? I wanted them to see what this might look like. Not that they would have to do it to pursue a career, but that they would see how to pursue it if they did. Well, I often talk to men and women about how we develop women leaders in the workplace. One of the keys to developing women leaders is to tell them what positive value they bring. The hardest thing for a woman who's in an environment where people don't look like her is feeling good about herself. And being encouraged to be who she is, to be authentically. And I'm telling you, I was 45 years old before felt safe enough to be myself.
Wow. Wow.
And I want that sooner for women. I want us to value them.
Well, you mentioned some research you just came across about this. Would you mind sharing some of that?
Happy
Sorry, one
to.
more question. I just thought of this.
It's a soundbite. I won't go long, but a really seminal study just finished called Women CEOs Speak. It's the first time women CEOs have been studied as a cohort. There's 60 of us in the study, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and run by Korn Ferry. It's public. It's online. You can Google it. But here's the cool headline. They went in search of profiling the woman CEO and comparing her to the norm, which just means men CEOs, right? So we were compared to the norm. And on 20 attributes of the ideal CEO, we were identical on 16 of them. First shock, right? We're also worried about differences. Over time, everybody says, well, women aren't risk takers. Well, wrong. Women take all kinds of risks. As they aspire and move up. They take new assignments. They take jobs in Japan. They do all kinds of risk-taking. So that's a positive surprise. So first surprise is we're actually not all that different. The second surprise, though, I think deserves some thought. The one way we are materially different is we profile as being lower confidence and higher humility.
Lower confidence, higher humility.
Yeah, I'm going to read you the statement because I don't want you to think I made it up from the study. Because they said this is really something we got to dig into. These two traits are intertwined. Humility indicates lack of self-absorption and, more importantly, expressed appreciation of others. Confidence scores, on the other hand, are about the focus of control, a person's belief as to whether he or she is in complete control of the outcomes. These women are willing to give credit to people that this comes through repeatedly, that they comment on people who have helped and supported them. They tend to value the contributions of others and concede that she can't single-handedly bend the future to her will. I'm proud of that. All right? If women believe we are not God and we value the teams that work for us, we are teaching a powerful principle of leadership that the whole world will be better off to come to understand it. And many men, by the way, have this trait. It's not just women. But this brings it to the conversation. And business doesn't talk a lot about the humility of the leaders. I mean, Jim Collins wrote a really good book about
Level 5 leader.
Yeah, but it's not a popular conversation.
Thank you.
I'm pretty transparent. So I'll give you an example. I gave an award at the company called the Grasshopper Board, and it comes from Isaiah 40:22. God holds the whole world in his hands, and we are grasshoppers. And I used it to recognize introverts that were contributing hugely to the organization and getting no praise. And so I would often say sometimes I would say ancient literature if I want to be really vague, and sometimes I'd just say Isaiah, and they'd have to figure it out. But and not heavy-handed, but comfortable saying scriptural things. And I think you have to decide what you're comfortable. I never wanted to put people off with my language, so I wanted to leave it open and outreach language and not judgmental or, I didn't grow up in that language. I don't know what you're talking about. Are you a Baptist? In the South, I get that a lot. Are you going to go that way on me? So I don't want to, give people concerns right up front. I want to give them a reason to be curious. So keeping it open. So the first thing I learned is I would describe the sale as kind of a wrenching, because it was unexpected and I really didn't want it to happen. So the reminder to all of us is don't hold on too tight. Don't hold on too tight. You're not in control of the outcomes. It's not about you. So don't hold on too tight, because my first exercise was getting relaxed about that and saying, actually my daughter coached me through it. She sent me a reading from Tolkien's The Leaf by Nigel. And she said, God's painting a beautiful tree, and you just only understand one leaf of it, Mom. And the tree is real, and one day in eternity you'll understand that you need to just let this go, Mom. That's from the mouth of babes. She's 27 years old. And so that's the first thing. Don't hold on too tight. The second thing is a counterpoint to it is in our intensity and pursuing very purposeful, intentional work. We have good hearts. We want to do the best, but we get so busy. And what I've really been called to notice in this 2-year period have been the importance of depth of relationships. The whole message for me spiritually has been go deeper with a few. And it means I've had to stop answering all the emails. I just can't do everything. That's all the options you have to pick. And the choice I want to make at this stage of life is to go deep with my daughters, my husband, a few leaders that I really want to leave a valuable handprint on, a few faith sisters and brothers, and narrow in and go deeper still in relationships. I think in business today the pace is working against human relationship, and I hope we can remind you of that, because if you want to influence leaders, the only way you influence someone is through personal relationship. You get no platform for influence if you don't know the people and invest in their lives. So
I want to thank you for picking us today and the friendship that we have, and with Jose and others that are here today, that you would come and
good friend.
And sometimes we overuse the word bless, but you blessed us with your presence and your wisdom. So thank you.
Thank you. It's
How about
great
a
to
round
be
of
with you.